Welcome to Biology, the scientific study of life. Behavior and habitat selection. It might seem that a tropical mosquito is deficient because she does not lay eggs in apparently suitable rice field habitat. But this behavior may simply reflect the fact that rice fields are an evolutionarily recent habitat and the mosquito is not adapted to it. Adaptation is not instantaneous, nor does evolution produce organisms perfectly adapted to every environment. Biotic factors. If behavior does not limit the distribution of a species, our next question is whether biotic factors, that is, other species, are responsible. In many cases, a species cannot complete its full life cycle if transplanted to a new area. This inability to survive and reproduce may be due to negative interactions with other organisms in the form of predation, parasitism, disease, or competition, or survival and reproduction may be limited by the absence of other species in which the transplant species depends. For instance, the absence of a particular pollinator species could prevent reproduction by a transplanted plant species, though such specific dependence is rare. More common examples of biotic limitation on geographic distribution involves predators, organisms that kill their prey, and herbivores, organisms that eat plants or algae. Simply put, organisms that eat can limit the distribution of organisms that get eaten. Let's examine one specific case of an herbivore limiting the distribution of a food species in certain marine ecosystems. There is often an inverse relationship between the abundance algae such as kelp, where sea urchins that graze on seaweeds and other algae are common. Large stands of seaweeds do not become established. Thus, the local distribution of seaweeds appears to be limited by sea urchins. This kind of interactions can be tested by removal and addition experiments in studies near Sydney, Australia. W.G. Fletcher's of the University of Sydney tested the hypothesis that sea urchins are a biotic factor limiting seaweed distribution. Fletcher's reasoned that if this hypothesis is correct, then more seaweeds should invade an area from which sea urchins have been removed. Conversely, if urchins are added to an area rich in seaweeds, the seaweeds should be diminished. One complication is that there are often several other herbivores in addition to sea urchins in the habitat where seaweeds may grow. Those Fletchers needed to perform a series of manipulative field experiments to isolate the influence of sea urchins on seaweeds in his study area, as shown in this figure. In addition to predation and herbivory, the presence or absence of food resources, parasites, disease, and competing organisms can act as biotic limitations on species distribution. Unfortunately, some of the most dramatic cases of limitation occur when humans introduce either accidentally or intentionally exotic predators or diseases into new areas and wipe out native species. Back to inquiry. Does feeding by sea urchins and limpets affect seaweed distribution? Experiment W.G. Fletcher's tested the effects of two algae-eating animals, sea urchins and limpets, on seaweed abundance near Sydney, Australia, and areas adjacent to a control site. Either the urchins, the limpets, or both were removed. Results. Fletcher's observed a large difference in seaweed growth between areas with or and without sea urchins. Notice seaweed other August, February, August, February. Notice the period. Notice also the Conclusion: removing both limbets and urchins resulted in the greatest increase of seaweed cover, indicating that both species have some influence on seaweed distribution. But since removing only urchins greatly increased seaweed growth, while removing only limbets had little effect, Fletcher concluded that sea urchins have a much greater effect than limbets in limiting seaweed distribution. And notice that removing both limited and urchins or removing only urchins increased seaweed cover dramatically. Notice also almost no seaweed grow in areas where both urchins and limbets were present or where only limbets were removed.